good afternoon, and welcome to this session on how COVID is affecting the state budget. My name is Beth Giesting. I'm the director of the Hawaii Budget and Policy Center, and I'm not planning to discuss this, but I do want to put you on to some resources that we have available on our website, and that website is at HIBudget, that's HIBudget.org. And some of the relevant information includes a budget primer for the state budget that we updated and posted last summer. And we just recently released a brief on the interaction of state spending with economic recovery. So I hope that you will find those useful. But I'm going to go on now because we have two of the leading experts in Hawaii to talk about state budget today. And so one is Jill Tokuda. Jill was a member of the Senate, the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. She now works as a consultant and is contributing to all kinds of projects across the state. Representative Sylvia Luke is also going to be joining us. And of course, she is the chair of the House Committee on Finance and will be pivotal on the budget decisions that we'll be seeing in the months to come. So before I turn it over to them, I do want to provide a little bit of context. The budget that the legislature is going to be grappling with this year is the two-year fiscal biennium budget. It starts July 1st, 2021 and runs through June 30th, 2023. Typically, the budget is supported by general fund. So half of the budget is supported by general fund. And of course, we know that general funds are down. So that presents a lot of challenges to creating the budget this year. The Council on Revenue provides their forecast, which determines how much the state is going to be able to spend. And they came up with a revised forecast just last week, which was considerably rosier than the one that they issued in October. But unfortunately, we're still in negative territory. So we continue to have challenges. And then also, during the Great Recession, the federal government came to our aid considerably by providing some subsidies to state government that helped us make ends meet. And we've been hoping that the federal government would provide that kind of relief this year. So far, we haven't had any luck with that, but perhaps the elections in Georgia last week will make that possible, but we are keeping our fingers crossed, but it's quite uncertain. So we have some big challenges going forward. The legislature has to present a two-year balanced budget. Revenues are down just when demand for government services is up. And we also know that cutting state budget or increasing state spending has a big effect on economic recovery. So there are a lot of important issues that need to be discussed and weighed and concluded over the next couple of months. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jill Tokuda. Jill?
Thank you, Beth. Very humbling introduction and assessment of the kinds of financial situations the legislature and the executive are going to have to deal with. But feel very confident that my former colleague and partner in crime, Chair Luke, will be very much up to the task in terms of what they'll be facing when the legislature opens next week. I just have a few very basic slides, and again, everything, as Beth mentioned, is so tentative given that revenue projections are constantly changing. Even as of last week, you see shifts of hundreds of millions of dollars. And of course, as we, roll forward into the months, kinds of expenditures that we're required to not just pay the basic bills, but account for COVID will fluctuate as well. So a lot of the information that I'm sharing is very much tentative, and I just want to put that out there as well. But let me see if I can pull up my slides right now and share screen. And so hopefully all of you can see that opening slide with just a real quick view of some of the things I wanted to cover today. First, kind of going over the big picture, looking at the multi-year financial plan. and then really kind of bring it closer to home in terms of how much flexibility the legislature and executive will likely have given a lot of the fixed and non-fixed costs that we're seeing. And then even further beyond that, as if those costs were not enough, a lot of the COVID costs that the state is now having to grapple with. What does that look like? What kind of potential reprieve will we see from federal support, as Beth alluded to? And then finally, also, we'll touch upon a website that we've put together to try to provide a better visualization or helpful visualization to the budget as it moves through the legislative process. So the first thing I wanted to share, and I apologize, it's probably very small on your screens, is a bit of a annotated sheet of the multi-year financial plan that is provided by the executive in their budget and brief that they submit to the legislature. A lot of these adjustments too are a result of the Council on Revenues changing their projections. So first, starting at the very top, as Beth mentioned, the legislature, the governor, they have to spend based upon the amount of revenue that the council projects will be coming in. And so some pretty big changes as of last week, going from a negative 11% to a negative 6.5%, provided over $300 million more than anticipated for fiscal 21. And while it was just a slight adjustment to fiscal 22, going from 8.5 to 6%, given revenue collections and then the adjustment for the previous year, actually 170 million more there as well. So pretty significant changes. One of the caveats of that, of course, is, and the core even mentioned it, fluidity of the times, right? These are very unstable numbers, plenty unknowns going forward. So these could shift, slight shifts in percentages either way. There are hundreds of millions of dollars more or less that government would have to spend on a lot of these items. Going a little bit further down, looking at the other revenues category, which obviously is very important. Everyone's again watching the federal government. So you've got some of those relief funds that we saw from the last CARES Act in these line items. You've got the $750 million in working capital that the state went out for, and some TAT distribution suspension, $203 million. So all of these types of efforts to be able to get and draw on additional revenues, maybe push some from other sources, this is encompassed in that category, again, to provide the state with as much money and resources as possible to fund those expenditures that are further down. So hopeful that we might get more coming in, especially from the federal level. But obviously, all of that has been necessary to balance to date. Going a little bit further down, one thing to note as well as the expenditures, the specific appropriations and CB costs. Essentially, the multi-year financial plan looking forward is flatlined when it comes to expenditures, really not looking at additional appropriations through bills. And as you know, these lines all change throughout the session as bills are considered and revenue projections change. But this plan right now really does not account for much more in the way of bill appropriations and future collective bargaining costs. So those that were agreed upon and factored into the base budget as of FY21 are in there, but nothing for future negotiations going forward. Also, what's really important to take a look at as well, right below that, other expenditures and adjustments, those red numbers, those reductions, these all include estimated furlough savings, the OPEB pre-fund savings in there as well, the health funds prepayment, the reduction of those payments over the next 4 years, COVID appropriations. You have pluses and you have minuses in there, but obviously those are numbers. Keeping it kind of in the negative to balance out the whole budget is contingent on a number of different actions. So for example, if furloughs were factored in to any of the FY21 considerations and that did not take place, then those numbers then get eliminated from that particular savings amount. So a lot of different assumptions in that other expenditures adjustments line, but necessary to have it in the red so that, again, we can balance out given the lower revenues that we're seeing. Going further down to 5% restrictions, the 80 million every year, which is somewhat standard. But then also understanding all those reds help when it comes to trying to make sure that we're not spending more than we're bringing in terms of revenues. And as of right now, as you can see, and this will change a bit and be a little bit better because of the changes to the Council on Revenues projections. We were spending well more, almost $500 million in 21, $350 million in 22 with the September projection. So again, that's going to fluctuate a little bit so that we will be in a slightly better position where we're not deficit spending as much, but we're still going to be in that situation. And coming out of the red so that we're not deficit spending is really, again, going to be incumbent on revenue growth, on flatlined expenditures, potential cuts in expenditures and adjustments to be able to make sure that we're not spending more than we're bringing in. And at this point, as you can see, the legislature had been very robust and aggressive in adding to the rainy day fund over the previous years. Much of that has now been tapped to be able to help us get through this time. So while you see the very small numbers on the bottom, it's always appreciated that we can try to reach a goal of maybe 10% of the budget in the EBRF. Right now, we're not even at 1%. Previous years, we've been 5%, 7%. We've been one of the leaders in the nation. Ultimately, that action by the legislature has helped us to be able to be even where we are today. Without that, it would have been a much more dire situation. Moving on really quickly, and I don't want to talk too much as well, why these things are so important to consider in terms of the revenue stream and what that means in terms of how much dollars the legislature will have to even pay. If you consider the fact that the general fund revenues are going down, but we do have continued fixed costs. Right now, if you take a look at the percentage of fixed costs relative to the estimated general fund revenues, well over half of the general fund revenues that are coming in through tax collections are already going to fixed costs. These are obligations we've made, in some cases, decades prior, whether it's to employees or for debt service. We have to pay those bills first. What's left at that point can then go to non-fixed cost items, which is everything from schools to healthcare to human services. So as this pot shrinks of available general fund revenue to fund everything that, quite frankly, many people feel is essential, then what you have to then do is start to, hope for additional revenues, restrict budgets as well. And we know that's taken place as well in terms of restricted program budgets in order to make sure that these services can stay alive with the limited funds available here. So a lot, like I said, a lot of these decreases here in what was available for general funds will be offset by either cuts, federal dollars, or other taxes and fees that can be put into here. So a very humbling situation and the gravity of the situation that the legislature and the executive will be facing. Some specific COVID costs not considered fixed by any means, but now are critically essential, never part of a budget line item prior to a year ago when COVID hit us. A lot of COVID costs, we can kind of put some dollar amounts to based upon the outpouring of federal dollars that we saw in 2020. So just to kind of give you an idea of the kinds of monies that were put towards COVID-related costs in 2020, thanks in part to the federal government providing billions of dollars in either discretionary or formulaic funding. When we took a look at all the funds that have come into Hawaii, about $10.6 billion, largely already expended, about $500 million went to hospitals and healthcare providers, about $333.7 million to COVID specific responses, whether it be contact tracing and testing and other supports, quarantine, safe travels, and about $444 million went to help families with food and shelter needs. So these are big items. The reason I wanted to highlight this is a lot of these needs, a lot of these supports will not go away as we enter into 2021. They will continue. And as we know, looking at the budget prepared by the governor, there are requests in there to factor in the mitigation costs for COVID in the range of about $200+ million for fiscal 22 and about $182 million for fiscal 23. So these costs will continue. The bright spot, if there's any, is that the federal government last month did pass, a package of relief for states. While not discretionary, there are a number of different line items that will provide supports for such things as COVID response, vaccination, shelter, the housing supports as well. the Hawaii Data Collaborative that I work with to do a lot of this posting, we will be posting the updated amounts in terms of what we're going to be seeing, hopefully from the feds as a result of that package. But the really big hope is as we see concerns where we don't have enough general funds to cover those non-fixed costs like education, like health support and whatnot, mental health. As we see what the need had been in the past 12 months, when you look at where federal dollars did go, hoping that some of the relief to come that's recently been passed and that Congress will consider will be able to fill in some of those gaps, very much needed as the state heads forward into the next biennium. And just really fast, finally, we are working with the Hawaii Data Collaborative to be able to really break down and understand the state budget, which is a constant moving target and very difficult, if just looking at the raw sheet. So please visit hawaiidata.org, click on the state budget link up top. And what we have done is provided some initial visualizations of the breakdown of where the changes can be seen in terms of, departmental funding, source means of financing funding, where general funds are going, where special funds are going, federal funds are going, by department, by fiscal year, as compared to the base budget. So a lot of different numbers, but hoping that some of these visualizations will give you an idea of both the gravity of the situation that the legislature will now be facing and where some of the funding offsets might take place by means of funding. So I've talked quite a bit at this point, and look forward to the conversation, and especially what Chair Luke has to share about what the legislature will be doing in the coming months. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Please do enter your questions and answers in the Q&A box. But meanwhile, I want to turn to Representative Luke. Chair Luke is now on the phone, and so please go right ahead.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Jill, for your terrific presentation. I'm sorry I cannot join by video, unfortunately, because the legislature is making a lot of progress to get ready for a completely virtual session. We have implemented certain firewalls, which prevents me from downloading programs and getting to systems. So unfortunately, my apologies to individuals who may have to stare at a blank screen, but hopefully maybe we're staring at Beth instead of a blank screen. But what I wanted to do is, with the assistance of Ian, if we can flash the first slide. Okay. So pre-COVID, which was not that far ago, it was just basically 9 months ago. And who would have thought back in March that 9 months, 10 months from now, we would be in this situation. But in March, the state of Hawaii was the best in the nation when it came to unemployment. We had the lowest unemployment numbers, and we were considered one of the prime examples of, how we are having a growing economy, a robust economy, and we had many new initiatives going into the 2020 sessions, including a comprehensive affordable housing package, early learning to provide learning access to 3- and 4-year-olds. We had aggressive packages. Unfortunately, there are things that we can control, and we basically shut down the economy in March and April. What that has resulted in was that, as you can see from this slide, if you can maneuver, from March until November, there has been an estimated 100,000 jobs that were lost in Hawaii. And if you think about that, that is a huge amount, because out of our entire population, not everybody is in working. We have 1.4 million people, but it's there's a segment of the population who are 0 and 18 who are students, not working. And there's the retired population not working. So if you look at, compared to our population, 100,000 job loss, it's significant. So what does that mean? So this is, even if, it's not right side up, you kind of get the gist of it. So we went from best in the nation to the worst in the nation. So as far as unemployment, loss of employment is concerned, we are at -15. The next best one is New York, which is at -10. So you can kind of imagine where the rest of the nation is compared to Hawaii. We would have thought Vegas and Nevada was closer to Hawaii because Vegas and Nevada is also a service-oriented industry. But as you can see from this chart, Vegas is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 down, not even remotely close to where Hawaii is. Hawaii is at -15. Vegas is around -8. Between -7 and -8. So this kind of shows the dire situation of where we are. I'm not going to run the rest of the slide. We can just leave it here so that at least there's something else to look at other than a blank screen. What does this mean, and why am I talking about this? In March of 2020, we had about $500 million in our unemployment trust fund. Just in 3 months, that entire $500 million was gone because of the huge number of unemployment claims. From July to December of this past year, the state has borrowed $700 million to pay for unemployment claims. This is not calculated into the governor's financial plan because they are continuing to struggle whether this should be borne by employers partly or this should be the state's responsibility. The legislature, the majority of legislators feel that this is something that the state has the responsibility to pay back because usually unemployment claims, unemployment assessment is based on the employer's history. So for instance, so if you take a look at, so far we have borrowed $697 million in payments. So this is only till December. So can you imagine, it's not as if come December, come January, everybody went back to work. So we're continuing to borrow. So we're borrowing about $700 million every 6 months. And as I stated, this is not calculated into the governor's financial plan. And that will provide additional challenges as we struggle through this budget crisis. The other thing that's happening is if the state does not provide assistance and pay back this entire amount, so the entire $700 million become due November of 2022. So the federal government gives some reprieve, but the whole amount becomes due in 2022. So for a number junkie like Jill, who's furiously writing this information down to calculate it into her data chart, I know she will do the calculation right away because what this means is this amount due becomes one-time payment always in November. So can you imagine in November of 2023, the amount potentially that we will have to pay back is between $700 million in the worst case scenario, if nobody goes back to work and there's no jobs, then it's potentially $1.4 billion that becomes due November 2023. And then every November this happens. So this exacerbates the problem. So what does that mean? For employers, because pre-COVID in March of 2020, employers, the assessment that employers would have to pay is at what's known as Schedule C. At Schedule C, the minimal amount that employers could pay for UI is $0. If they had a good history and they didn't lay anybody off, no problem, potentially some employers pay $0. On an average, every employer paid about $630 per employee. Right now, we are at the highest. So unemployment trust fund is based on how much money is in the trust fund. There's nothing, so we're at the highest. That could potentially mean that an employer's average employee assessment could go from $630 to $1,900, or on the max side is $3,400. That in itself, for some employers, and then this is, when we talk about employers, it's everybody, right? It's hospitals, doctors, it's nonprofits, it's certain businesses, private schools. It's not what we think are the multi-billion-dollar corporation that has business here. It's everybody. So I know people are struggling through this, and in addition to struggling with loss of economic revenues, loss of business, so knowing that come March, which is only 2 months away, their assessment could go up by 3 to potentially, sometimes 6 times. It is going to be a sticker shock for a lot of folks. So we are working with the administration, struggling through this. So what does this also still mean? In 2009, how the state dealt with the economic downturn at that point was through furlough Fridays, and that's something that nobody ever want to repeat, right? Every Friday, schools were closed, government services were closed, and it wasn't unusual, even as in 2019, 2020, it wasn't unusual for some departments to come and ask for certain things that were cut in 2009. So if you can imagine that in 10 years, we barely recover all the cuts that we made in 2009. So going forward, even if we are able to stabilize the economy, the immediate cuts that we will make in state government will have detrimental impact, not just in the next few years, but it could potentially have impact in the next 10 to 15 years. Just from our experience from the 2009 cuts. As Beth and Jill both talked about the Council on Revenues. The Council on Revenues projected, so Ian, if you could run you don't have to run if you can go to the 5th slide. I know it's a little small. This number is a little outdated, only because it doesn't have the revised Council on Revenues projection. The bad news, there was a rosy side and there was a bad side. The good news was that for 2021, the Council on Revenues revised their projections from -11 to -6.5. The bad news is for fiscal year 22, they revised it from positive 8.5 downwards to 6.0. So as you can see from this chart, this is pre-Council on Revenues projection. I still have the 8.5. I have to readjust that to 6. And so what that shows is the Council on Revenues and the economists who looked at the recovery, they looked at it as a slower recovery, which is contrary to what we initially thought was this will be a short-lived and we'll have a significant upward rebound in the double-digit recovery. That we're not seeing, only because the mainland COVID reactions are varied, and the amount of tourist activity we usually try to capture, which is in the West Coast, that's where the surges are occurring. So when there's surges, they're shutting down. The result of their shutdown is people are not going to want to travel. So we're having that delayed recovery because of some of those behaviors. So one of the things that we will have to deal with, which is inevitable, would be budget cuts. Where those cuts will happen is going to be the issue, right? So far, we have heard from majority of the departments, and it has been heartbreaking because some of the cuts have included reduction in sex assault victim services, and sex assault victim services is one service that I myself fully funded a few years ago because I felt that that was a critical service that needs to continue. It was cuts to legal service for the immigrant population, reduction in programs like LUC, workforce development, SPED budget. There were additional programs that were being cut that people are having really hard time with, and it has been a struggle. It has been challenging. And as we try to figure out, okay, how do we make certain agency whole, that has to come from somewhere else, right? So I think this is going to be a tough session, not just here, but for the next several years. I do know that various folks have proposed tax issues, tax increases, and tax policies. We're very mindful that we have to be just careful when we deal with tax increases as not to hurt the low-income individuals or hurt the working class, because as we continue to try to tax, we're only taxing the same people again and again. So we're being very mindful of the tax policies. The reality is we're still chasing $1.7 to $1.8 billion, and there's no amount of taxes, immediate tax relief that will be able to bring in that kind of money. So it has to be a combination of some revenue enhancement, but significant amount of government reduction. So I'm going to stop there and see if we can field some questions. I do think that Hawaii is unique and Hawaii is special. And the fact that we have gone through 9 months, 10 months together, struggling through the pandemic, and basically for a lot of people, making ends meet, making do, and that's what you hear, people saying, making do, and we're very appreciative of every citizen, going through this struggle and tough time in light of kind of unclarity of what the future holds. So, my sympathy and, our aloha goes out to every individual in the state. So I'm going to turn it back over to Beth.
Thank you so much, Chair Luke. That was very sobering, but very informative. And I think that it gives all of us a much greater context for the struggles that you and all the legislature will have in trying to balance the budget and balance the needs that we see all across the state. I don't see any questions. Ian, am I missing something?
Maybe they're all shocked.
I think they're stunned, yes.
So, I do want to, because I'm spending time with Jill in a different capacity, because Jill is helping to sort through many of the data. I do want to give her a lot of credit, because one of the things that happened in 2009, one of the things that didn't happen in 2009, let me say that happened in 2020, was we were able to build a significant amount into the rainy day fund. In 2009, and me becoming finance chair, we barely had, about 17 million. We're lucky if we had 17 million, but on the best years, 25 million. We never had amounts in magnitude of 400 million. So 400 million, Jill and I were able to save all that amount because we were fortunate to be money chairs when when we were looking at $800 million, $1 billion surpluses. And now looking back, I think Jill and I, a lot of times we were criticized for putting in too much into the rainy day fund when there's so many needs out there. But I am so thankful that I had Jill by my side in WAM, because not having had $400 million to plug immediate hole, we would be in that much more problem. Because $400 million, it's just exponentially takes care of so many things. So I just wanted to say thank you, Jill, for your service to the state and for helping us. Your efforts then is really helped us to navigate through this challenging time right now.
Oh, thank you. Definitely could never have imagined back then that we would be in this situation today, for sure. And I'm glad that it's been able to help balance out the budget a bit. But as you mentioned, lots of tough decisions, right? And not going to just be life as usual, unfortunately, for us from a health perspective, from a gathering perspective, but especially from a budget perspective. I did want to toss in here, the UI issue is something that has been somewhat talked about in the mainstream media, but not really focused on. So really feel good that the legislature has been looking closely at how to better support businesses. Because as Chair Luke mentioned, depending on how quickly we can get people back to work, we're looking at anywhere from a $700 million obligation to over $1 billion from the feds just for a 12 to 16 month period. And that could continue depending on our unemployment rate. But got to understand as well, moving to different schedules, tripling, quadrupling, the cost to businesses. So many businesses are teetering on the edge right now. So if that breaks the camel's back and they exit the market, they go out of business, all you're doing at that point is adding more people to the UI rolls and having to have that paid back by a smaller pool of employers. So the state considering, that kind of obligation and accounting for that in, the financial plan, which she's absolutely correct, that is not even considered in the governor's financial plan, which means you'd have to account for even more cutbacks to be able to jiggle in that kind of obligation. That's pretty significant, because if it's thrown back on businesses, this is just my humble opinion, you're going to see a retraction of business. You're going to see more in the unemployment rolls. And again, this is just going to exponentially increase the problem that we have right now with our UI fund. So really happy to see the legislature looking at this way, but understand the huge financial puka it does also create, an obligation liability it creates too. So I think questions.
Yes, we have a question from Sonia Gupta, and she's asking about, as you can read, the efficacy of preventive dental services in treating COVID, and wondering whether there are any thoughts on helping the Medicaid population gain access to dental care as a preventive measure with the COVID pandemic.
So that's a really good question, Sonia, and it's good that you brought that up, because adult dental was one program that was cut in 2009, which never got re-implemented. So that kind of shows you how in 2009, because of budget cuts, there were significant amount of reduction in services, never got reinstated. Partly because in order to reinstate, it would have cost about in the range of like $20 to $30 million, and that we just struggled to make that an option. So since then, Department of Human Services, thanks to the efforts of Judy Moore Peterson, has come out with a variation of services, and she worked really hard with CMS to see if we can provide variation as opposed to the food service, right? The food service would cost, 20-something million dollars. Variation would be significantly less. This year, as we are going through all the budget cuts, I did meet with some of the clinics to explore this. This year will be very, very difficult, but, we're hoping that the sooner we can get the economy moving and we get revenues in, we are going to revisit that again.
Thank you very much. And then Clifford Chang asks what you see in terms of recovery with state testing programs for tourists and the vaccine that we hope all of us will be able to get soon.
Yeah, so thank you, Clifford. As you saw by the announcement that the House Speaker and HPH and Queens made yesterday, they are planning to start mass vaccination process next week. I think in addition to that, I think the state will very quickly pivot to changing the current tourist testing protocol to also recognize individuals who got vaccinated, right? So these are individuals, if you get vaccinated, you're still going to get sick. But hopefully you won't get as sick, or you won't have, extreme symptoms. And so I think we still need to figure out the transmission rate, because even if you're vaccinated, this is not like chickenpox where you're vaccinated and you're inoculated for life. Unfortunately, even if you get the vaccine, you're still going to get sick. You may not have that kind of symptoms, but I think the vaccine is a game changer. It is going to provide huge amount of life into the economy, and it's going to provide confidence. But people will still need to mask. People still need to social distance. People are still going to have to hygiene, but it is completely a game changer, Clifford. So thank you for that question.
Any others? Yes, so here is a question about revenue generating proposals under discussion at the legislature.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. That's a really good question. So some of the EK administration is still vetting through some of those revenue generating or tax increase proposals. One of the things that they are looking at, and some of the legislators are looking at, is increase in the barrel tax. The state of Hawaii is the only state in the union that tax imported fossil fuel. And so it's every imported fossil fuel, which is non-aviation because of FAA issues, the state of Hawaii tax. So I know people have talked about the carbon tax. The reality is the state of Hawaii does have a carbon tax. The thing is that it is spread out through barrels, so it's $5 a barrel. So that it's spread out through everything that is bought. There is discussion about increasing that, and I do believe the governor's financial plan increases the barrel tax from $5 at least 3 times. The barrel tax, the revenue side that goes into general fund out of the barrel tax is about $20 million. So if you increase that 3 times, that comes out to about $60, $70 million. So that's one proposal that is being discussed. I know people are also looking at sugar tax. I think the issue with the sugar tax is Department of Health wants the sugar tax proceeds to fund programs. I think the administration will be looking at the sugar tax completely as a revenue generation to balance the budget. So that's going to be, different issues. Last year, the House passed increase in income tax for individuals making $100,000 individually or $200,000 as a couple. I do think we will revisit that, maybe not at the 100, because individuals making $100,000, if you have a family of 4 and you're a single parent, that's kind of a totally different situation than a single individual, right? So I think we have to revisit that, but I think there is an appetite to look at some type of variation of income tax restructuring. The other thing which we are very interested in is the amount of, so pre-COVID, we had 10 million tourists on a yearly basis, and that number has gone up every year. Every year, the number of tourists that visited Hawaii has gone up. But guess what? Tourist spending has not gone up on a proportionate level. So that means we're giving away our natural beauty and our resources without having tourists pay their fair share. What does that mean? We should really look at, one of the things that I'll be aggressively working on is trying to create a master plan of all our natural resources and parks. So there should be a system where if you want to access the parks, it should be by online registration and limited access of parking, and there's going to be shuttle service, and there will be paved parking area where we are going to charge you for parking. And this is kind of a dual purpose of having revenue generation from tourists, but at the same time, it is trying to, at the same time, preserve some of our natural resources and our natural areas. And I think because we can reevaluate, because we don't have that as many tourists, we can kind of reevaluate and see, okay, let's look at system by system, on park by park. Let's do a master plan to do kind of a planned park master plan. But part of it will be charging use of parks by tourists, and whether it is rental cars or whatever, trying to maximize the amount that we can generate from tourists, so that the amount that we generate from that would be proportionate to the number of visitors that come in. So these are the various ideas that are being floated around. I'm sure there are others.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question if there is one. And if not, I just want to thank Jill and Sylvia so much for joining us today. This has been so informational. And I thank all of you too. Oh, here's one, Matthew Nagato. How might we do a better job of ensuring that health and social services, which are cut during tough budget years, get replenished or made whole again in better economic times?
Yeah, so let me answer that. As we're going through our budget hearings, some of the departments have seen 20% reduction compared to others. So for instance, as an example, DBID, there's the governor's budget is proposing to reduce DBID's budget by over 20%. Attorney General's office is 20%. DLIR, which is Department of Labor, is around 20%. That's not the same as Department of Health and Department of Human Services. They're getting substantially less amount of reduction, and it's because of the very thing that you asked. There will be, we will continue to look out for our safety net, the most neediest population, our low-income population, and that is our state's obligation. So we will need to prioritize all of these things and then come out at the end of session how we can balance the budget.
If I could also add in there, and I just threw it, I hope in the right chat box there, a link to the state budget breakdown that we are doing. And to Chair Luke's point, one of the things that you can do is toggle between the methods of finance. You can even look at all means of finance for the departments and see how the budgets are changing compared to the base relative to what the governor proposed. And in the future, we'll have the House draft, the Senate draft, the conference draft. But really quickly there, if you look at that very first visualization and you look at all means of financing, you can see that, or at least for the general fund ones, you can see that many of the health programs, human service programs, have not been cut compared to others. And in some cases, like education, the university, it's just by, nature of the size of their budget that they are getting some of these cuts. And again, too, I believe, and I can't speak for the governor, but there's a lot of anticipation of future funds coming in from the feds for those specific amounts. But part of what the visualizations can kind of show you is which departments are taking, as Sylvia mentioned, a larger percentage cut versus those that have potentially been spared, especially given the current health situation and human services situation that we're seeing. So hopefully, as we go along through the budget process, we'll be able to continue to show those transitions and where some of the cuts are being felt more. What's missing from this, because this is scraped from the governor's biennial budget, is potential offsets and increases from federal funds that the state will be receiving from what they passed in December and hopefully over the next few months. But this just kind of echoes what Chair Luke mentioned, that it's not always just a clean, straight cut across the board. Consideration is given to those priority needs, and you'll see that really start to firm up better in the House and Senate drafts.
Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. All of you who have been part of this session, thank you, Jill, and thank you for the work that you're doing with the Way Data Collaborative. And Chair Luke, thank you so much for all the work that you've got ahead of you. I know that it will be very challenging, and we will all be thinking of you quite frequently in the months to come.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Jill, and thank you everybody for joining this session.